wants to tame me. You can't catch me on the run, cause I'm gone, yeah. I blaze trails, set fire to what's behind me. No, I'm never looking back, I'm on the run. I could only ever be what I'm made to be. Feels good when I'm living on the edge. Watch me now, roll like thunder, gonna shake the ground. Can't stop me now, I don't give up and I won't back down. I'm a force of nature, can't be contained. I got lightning running all through my veins. Watch me now, watch me now.
No matter what it is you need, you'll find it at your local Par-Mar store. From gas to groceries, snacks, and everything else you always seem to run out of, Par-Mar stores has it. Need more savings? Download the Par-Mar app and sign up for the Par-Mar Rewards Card. You won't only see our stores in your neighborhoods, you'll see us in your neighborhoods too. We are proud to be in your town and proud to be a part of the community. Come see us at Par-Mar stores, and remember, if there's not a Par-Mar store near you now, there will be soon.
Hello, Mountaineer Nation. I'm the Wolfman, Dale Wolfley, and this is the WolfMan's Call. And yes, I promised you tonight, head coach Don Nehlen, Hall of Fame head coach Don Nehlen. And guess what? We got the Hall of Famer himself, Don Nehlen, giving out tons of wisdom, just things I've forgotten for years. And man, he knows so much more than I ever have, and he's taught me so much in my life. And I get it. You know, if you're a coach, listen. Wow, coaching wisdom. If you're a player, listen. Wow, players' wisdom. And if you're a fan, listen. Wow, fan wisdom, and knowing about a football program and the principles of how he operated a team and the honor in which he did and the loyalty, which is a big word for him. We talk about a lot of things, but don't miss the point. Honor and loyalty and what he is about. My goodness, man. Go ahead. Enjoy. Hello, Mountaineer Nation. And yes, as promised, I have the man, the GOAT, the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Yes, they used to call him Dandy Don because he was so fine and dressed as the head coach at WVU. But we, as a football players, many of us, and especially the Wolfley boys, we called him Daddy Don for everything that he has meant so much to us in our lives. A mega factor. Coach, head coach, former WVU head coach, Don Nehlen, and Hall of Famer, baby. How are you today, Coach?
Good, Dale. Good. How are you doing?
Good. How was that intro? Was that kind of like a WWE intro there? Like, bringing you in and come on down.
You're something else. You're a wild guy.
Well, I'll tell you what. You used to tell me to run through walls, and I did. That's how wild I was. That's for sure, Coach. And, I can still remember to this day the first time you came in our house at 45 Hudson Road in Orchard Park. You were recruiting my brother Roddy. And you told my mom, and you said, Mrs. Wolfley, I'm as all-American as apple pie. And you know what, Coach? There's never been more truth to that statement. You were an all-American coach, not only Hall of Famer, an all-American, baby.
Well, hard telling what I said when I went into Holmes, but I wanted Ronnie, and then I eyed you, and I said, I'm going to get that guy someday, too.
Well, you sure did, Coach. And it's amazing. And I'd be remiss, I'm sorry, if I didn't say Ronnie sends his love to you, man, and wishes he could see that. We got to get you on the Three Wolves of Football podcast. That's what we got to do.
That'd be great. The Wolfley family, boy, it's amazing. All three of you guys turned out to be great players. Every one of you. It's amazing.
Well, I appreciate that, Coach. And we're just going to leave it at that and go with it because that's your words. Coach, you were just at the Bobby Dodd Awards. I believe in 1988 you won the Bobby Dodd Coach Award. Can you go ahead and explain that, please?
Well, this past weekend at the Peach Bowl, it's put on by Chick-fil-A. And at one time we played in the Peach Bowl. And I'm in the Peach Bowl Hall of Fame, and Bobby Dodd is hooked up with the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year Award, and they invited Jan and I to the Ohio State Georgia game put on by the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year Award. And the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year Award, I won it in 1988, and that's probably the most prestigious of all of the Coach of the Year awards, because Bobby Dodd is one of the greatest college coaches of all time. And he not only was a great coach, but he stood for the highest principles of college football. He not only won games, but he turned out great men after they played college football. And his principles are what most college coaches want their kids to turn out to be. Guys that not only played college football, but turned out to be great leaders in their communities, had families, and their families turned out to be great leaders in the communities that they represented. But Bobby Dodd stood for the greatest principles. If a guy went through, I coached at West Virginia for 21 years, and I don't remember many of the wins, and I don't remember many of the losses, but I remember all of our guys. And when I go back and I see all of our guys, they've all been successful. They all have great families. And that's a lot of it is because of our football program. And that's what I want people to remember me for, is we turned out great kids.
Yeah, Coach, that is so true. And for so many of my colleagues, among their brotherhood. And when you look at it now, Coach, how is the college coaching profession doing in your overall mind? Not as anyone in particular or any teams in particular, but how overall are the coaches doing in turning out the product and living in the form of Bobby Dodd?
Well, the coaching profession, it's changed so much because the game has changed and the money is so big, and now with this transfer portal and they're paying players to play, and the coaches make so much money now, it's almost like pro football. And with the players, it's almost like free agency. And I don't know if I could even coach today, Dale. I really don't. We build our program at West Virginia by recruiting guys, redshirting them, building them bigger and stronger and faster. And most of the kids that we recruited didn't play until they were ready their third year, because most of the kids we recruited, some people didn't even want. And now, by the time a guy's been at a school for 2 or 3 years, he leaves and goes somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe not even 2 years, Coach. That might
be
more like
not
1
even.
year.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I just, it'd be so difficult to build a program today because kids leave and kids come in, and I don't know. I grew up in football that one of the key ingredients for a player was loyalty. And you take yourself, you were very loyal to West Virginia's football program, and to me as a coach. I knew I could depend on Dale Wolfley. I'm not too sure the coaches today can depend on their players, because tomorrow that player may come in your office and say, Coach, I've decided to transfer to who knows where.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens all the time. They tell me over 1,000 kids have already decided to transfer someplace.
Oh,
And
that's the truth. That is the truth, Coach. You know, and I want to get back to that, but I gotta go back to this, and I'd be remiss. I have been butchering a story for years, decades, and the story was about a mountaineer coming out of the well. I guess, and there's a pit panther at the top, and before every pit game, you told a story. It was the Pit Panther 101 story, and I heard it every year. And I've been butchering it, so I want to give you this opportunity to clarify all the wrongs that I have done. And go ahead and please tell the story of the Pit Panther and the mountaineer in the well.
well, I always told, I would tell our freshmen that story too, Dale, is how I wanted our players to understand, because when I came here, Pitt was our big rival, big rival. And I'd tell our players, I'd draw a well on the board and I'd put a mountaineer at the bottom of the well. And at the top of the well would be a Pit Panther. And I was a terrible artist. And the players had no idea what that was. And I'd say, now, this thing down at the bottom, that's a West Virginia Mountaineer. And up at the top, that's a Pit Panther. And that in his hand is a big mallet that weighs about 20 pounds. Then I'd have that mountaineer climb up that well. And by the time he got up there and he'd get his hands at the top of that well, and he'd pull his hands up and look at over the top of that well, that daggone Pit Panther would take that mallet and smack him. And his hands would bleed and it'd fall down and they'd fall back down to the bottom of that well. But that mountaineer was tenacious. He'd crawl back up at the top of that well. And when he got back up there, he'd look again. And that daggone panther would smash him again. And he'd fall back down in that well. And he'd crawl back up it again. He got up there the third time, and that panther smacked him again. When he fell down the fourth time, he said, you know what? That panther's getting a little slower. That mallet's getting heavier for him. He says, I think I can get him this time. And he goes back up there. The fifth time he got there, that panther was slow with the mallet, and he chacks him. And on the fourth quarter, he gets him, and he beats him. And that's how we're going to play Pitt. We're going to be so tenacious that we'll get these guys every year in that fourth quarter, because we're going to be more tenacious, better conditioned, and we're going to beat them. We're going to beat them every year because we're more tenacious. That was my story. That's how we're going to play these guys. The big thing about that story, Dale, is how I drew that mountaineer coming out and that panther. The kids, they looked at that thing and they couldn't believe what this mountaineer looked like and what that panther looked like, and what that mallet looked like. They got a kick out of that. And anyhow, it resonated throughout the program.
And it still does. Let me tell you that right now. I'm on fire right now. And any player that's going to be listening to this interview is going to be like, yeah, coach. Yeah, I remember that. Because that was our livelihood. That was our blood. That was it, man. That was our just tenacity, coach. Thanks so much for that. And I'm going to move this on. I'm not going to keep hanging there. But I will say this. You had a story and an illustration for practically everything. You really did, and it really was an easy way for the players to understand you and what the points you were trying to get across. And I guess it probably goes back to, as a coach, you got to be a teacher, and as a teacher, you're a coach, and being able to translate that, because it's no good if you know it, but your player doesn't know that, then you're not a good teacher or coach. And I think that's the difference.
Well, I wanted them to understand the word tenacity and tenaciousness. And when you played Pitt, that's the way we had to play.
Yeah,
Well,
you sure did.
when I first came here, Pitt had the best football players in the country. They were one of the top 3 teams in the country, and we had had 4 straight losing seasons when I came here, and we had to play those guys, and I had to find a way to hang in there with them, and we caught them my 3rd year and beat them.
Sure did, Coach. Let's talk about when you came into West Virginia, because you spent all this time at Bowling Green, at Michigan, all these years. But your first, I guess, Power 5 now, not then, but is the West Virginia, and you saw the Pitts, the Penn States, Boston College, your Syracuse, because Syracuse was tough as nails. People don't realize that so much. They were a powerhouse, and with head coach Dick McPherson, your good buddy, and so all those teams in the Big East were so tough. And here you were coming into a brand new stadium in West Virginia, and you really had to change the way West Virginia was looked at, and you really had to transform that. And so how did you build that program?
Well, the big thing, Dale, we had to do was change the way people thought of our program. And my first 6 months at West Virginia, I coached the players from their chin up. My coaches coached them from their chin down. I worked on, because none of them believed in themselves. I remember distinctly the first meeting that I had with the team. I went in and I had about 85 guys there, and none of them had ever played on a team that had a winning season. None of them had ever played on a winning team.
Wow.
And when I went in there, half of them didn't even want to look at me. Their heads were down. They were slumped over. They didn't even know how to sit in a chair. And the first thing I said to them, I'm going to have to teach you how the hell to attend a meeting. I remember going and kicking a chair, and it was Oliver Luck. I said, here in the hell, how you sit at a meeting? And I got their attention in a hurry. And we got after them pretty good in the winter. And believe it or not, we had a pretty good football team my first year here. Had we not had to go to Hawaii in the middle of the year, can you imagine going to Hawaii in the middle of the season?
No, not with any breaks in between. No, I couldn't.
No, and playing them in a night game with that time change, and coming back, and guess who we had to play? Pitt and Penn State back to back. Can you imagine that?
No, you can't imagine that.
It was ridiculous. But I'll say one thing about Frank Signetti. Frank, a lot of people didn't think Frank was a very good coach because he had 4 losing seasons. Frank Signetti was a good coach. And he left me, not a lot of players, but he left me about 7 or 8 really good players. He left me Robert Alexander. He left me Oliver Luck, Fulton Walker, Delbert Fowler,
Talley,
Darrell Talley. We had a lot of guys that didn't belong in the big league, so to speak, and we had no depth, and we were playing guys that should have been playing at Fairmont. But anyhow, those kids wanted to win, and they worked their tail off. Somehow, as a head coach today, you got to find a way to use that word loyalty. I think of my days back with Michigan with Bo. And, of course, when I played college football, Bo Schembechler was the offensive line coach at Bowling Green when I was the quarterback. And Dwight Perry was our head coach, and those guys preached loyalty all the time, to not only to the players but to the coaches. And when I coached, I preached loyalty to my coaches. I told them, hey, if you can't be loyal, when I took the West Virginia job, and I hired my staff. I said, if you can't be loyal to West Virginia University and to me and to the rest of the coaches, then you're in the wrong place. And when you recruit a football player for West Virginia right now, I think you got to give their parents a little talk and say, hey, if your son can't be loyal to West Virginia for at least 3 years, then I'm not sure I want him. It's a two-way street. I'm going to be loyal to your son. I'm going to treat him like a second father, and I'm going to pay his way to school. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure he graduates. But if he's going to be here a year or two and then run off somewhere else, then I think he ought to go to somewhere else to start with.
Well,
because loyalty is a two-way street. And
okay, Coach, but let me stop you right there. Does that first have to go to your coaching staff and then to the player, or does it not matter?
Well, I think you got to preach that to your coaches. Dale, I coached 21 years at West Virginia, and I didn't pay my coaches anything because I didn't get paid anything. I mean, these coaches today, they coach one guy, and they make 3 times as much money as my assistant coaches made. 3 and 4 times as much. And I probably only lost maybe 5 coaches in 21 years. That's how loyal they were. That's how loyal they were to me.
Yeah.
Because I preached it.
I remember.
Coach. When I hired them, they said to me, Coach, what kind of contract do I get? You know what I told them, Dale? I said, you have the same kind of contract that I have, as long as you do your job. You don't have a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year. You have the same one that I have, as long as you do your job.
That's pretty. That goes back to a lot of old school, a lot of memories. For myself, I'm thinking of all the coaches that you had with Mike Jacobs, Dave McMichael, Steve Dunlap. Just amazing.
They were all with me. Heavens, even the ones I left. I remember when Doc Holliday left. He came in my office and was crying. But he was making $55,000. North Carolina State paid him $105,000.
Mm-hmm.
He would have never, ever left. He was a West Virginian from the day one.
He sure was. Yep.
And I told him, I said, hey, Doc, you got 3 kids. You got to go. We were paying
great point.
Paying $55,000. Yet if we played North Carolina State, everybody would have expected us to win. That's what we paid.
Yeah.
And every time we played Pitt, every one of them were making 2 and 3 times what we were making. Their head coach was making 5, 6 times what I was making.
Yeah, Coach, that tells me that you can win and not having the advantages. There is a way to go ahead and do it. And you found that formula and built it from what you were the first year in 80? And then you went up and you played for a national championship. Now, I just showed a game. I condensed it. It was the Penn State 1988 game. And I was watching it. I'm like, the intensity, the blocking fundamentals, the tackling fundamentals, the angles of the players running to the ball. And I'm seeing all these fundamentals with the knees bent, the back is flat. There's so many strong points. The atmosphere of the stadium was absolutely wild. Now, I know that was Penn State 88, big game. But what I'm trying to get at is back then, and even through probably the last 15 years or so, for me, watching the personal fundamentals, the techniques of the game of players has changed. And it hasn't been good. Why do you see that as that?
Well, like I say, Dale, I was an old-fashioned coach, and I learned my football from old-fashioned guys. And my practice organization never changed. When we went to practice, our practice organization, we first went individual work, then we did group work, and then we did teamwork. And for example, if we were going to in the team work, if we were going to work on the trap game and off tackle, then during an individual, Mike Jacobs worked like crazy on working on the trap, and Dave McMichael worked like crazy on the off tackle, and then they went to that was during individual, and then we go to group. So Mike and Dave took those kids together and they worked on that. And then we put it all together, and we were always sound fundamentally. And the other thing that's amazing to me is we hit the sled every day. Every day that offensive line came off and hit the sled.
Yes, we did.
I go off. I don't even see sleds on practice fields anymore. I mean, maybe they have them. I don't know. But my offensive line, they came off the ball. They came off the ball, and but the sled was a big part of my offensive scheme, and a lot of teams don't use the sleds today, and there's probably a reason, because of different formations and so forth. I don't know. Offenses are a lot different today, and they do a lot of things really well, a lot better than I ever did. They can get in so many formations so much quicker. They'll just say a word. They'll say Geronimo, and boom, that tells everybody where to go. And they're different. They're better. They do things quicker.
That my whole thing is, I've been preaching this for a little bit now, but let's take the best of both worlds and mix them, because right now the modern game is lacking a lot of the character of the old game and the basic fundamentals, whereas, and what you just said, that now they're doing so many things more advanced than what we used to do. There's got to be some place in the middle there. I was kind of looking at as Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, until TCU took it to them. But I saw that to them this past year, and they were a lot of fun for me to watch.
Yeah, well, everything kind of goes in cycles, Dale. And if you notice, the pros are really starting to go back to the run. The pros are going back to saying, hey, if you can't run it, you can't win. And they're all going slowly but surely back to throwing the football 25 and 26 times a game and running the ball 30 times a game. And they're not throwing it. When they throw it 45 and 50 times, Dale, they lose. And when they run the ball 40 times, they win. Yeah. And the pros are slowly but surely going back to running the football.
See, I'm loving this, Coach, because I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I have to inject this in there. What happens? They've been turning their season around. Now, I'm not saying they're a bunch of giant killers, but they are Baltimore Ravens beaters, and they went out there, and Najee Harris has been running like fire, and Jalen Warren is doing the same thing so it's 1-2 punch. The Steelers offensive line, when they named Kenny Pickett as quarterback, they had to find a way to run the ball to compete in games because he's a rookie. He did it halfway through the season, in my mind.
And they've gotten better every week. Right now, Pittsburgh's a pretty good football team. 5 weeks ago, they weren't worth a nickel.
Yeah.
Right now, they're pretty daggone good.
But it just amazes me how they're going ahead and putting on pads on a Friday in the NFL, which tells me that on Tuesdays and Wednesdays in college ball, it should still be a fully padded day, just to let the guys know in a mentality type way that you have to have full gear on, in my opinion. What's your opinion on that?
Same as yours, Dale.
Oh, you taught me well.
Like I say, that's the game. I mean, regardless of what you say, football is blocking and tackling. And consequently, since it's blocking and tackling, then you have to practice it. And if you don't practice it, then you don't get better at it. I mean, when you coach basketball, you practice shooting the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And so football is blocking and tackling. And so you got to practice it. And I coached 43 years, and on Tuesday and Wednesdays, we practice blocking and tackling. Just that simple.
Yeah, we did, Coach. But the thing is, it was a mentality that you also had to get ones versus ones. And I think that today that I see that the college coaches are saying, we have to be more of a model like the NFLs. And to me, the model of the NFL is you got to find your fundamentals before you get to the NFL. I mean, it's hard to model. Well, when do you actually learn your fundamentals? Because then high schools are like, well, we got longer seasons and we can't beat these guys down, so we're going to have to start modeling after college. And it's all running downhill. You used to say it all the time. It all starts up here and then it just runs down and affects everybody. And then it starts snowballing. And then all of a sudden the game of fundamentals is ruined.
Yep. I'll bet you, and I don't know this, but I'll bet Andy Reid puts pads on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, he's old school, but I'll bet he puts pads on them.
Well,
I could be wrong.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been wanting to talk to you a lot about this. We've talked a little bit, but not actually on tape. So I want to go to here. The RPO, the run pass option. They've added 2 more yards to the offensive lineman to engage. You are an offensive guy to begin with. Do you like the RPO rule, run pass option, RPO? Do you like that rule where it's 3 yards that offensive lineman can engage and actually get to linebackers and then throw a deep post at a pattern? Or you think that's a little bit unfair advantage to the defense?
No, I think that's, Dale, I cannot understand how in the world those officials can make some of those calls. That's crazy. Once an offensive lineman engages somebody, he ought to be able to block him. And, when they run some of those calls back, it's unfair to an offensive lineman. It really is. I think that's one of the great plays. And, well, you remember, that's one of the greatest plays we ever had. One of the greatest plays we ever had. Take that quarterback down the line and then running back, and because that freezes that defensive back and that wide receiver runs right by him, and we used to throw it over their head all the time.
Well, it was perfect when he had Mage. You would do, I believe it was like 18 or 19 we used to run it, and he would do the option freeze and then drop it back. Reggie's doing a post. And you know what? He was usually wide open. And in fact, he scored a big touchdown in that Penn State game doing just that. And let me ask you this, Coach. Because of that, with the option, you don't have to go ahead and put a huge option package in your game. But what option package does for your offense is what?
Well, the biggest thing is it makes their defense spend a lot of time in preparing for it, even though you don't have to spend a lot of time in doing it, because the way we ran it off our regular blocking scheme up front. When we called the pass, we blocked it just like we did the run. So we had no problem practicing it, and yet they had an awful lot of problems defending it. And they had to spend a lot of time doing it, and that took a lot of time away from their preparation in doing other things. And so that's the biggest advantage in having some option in your offense, is what it does to your opponent as far as preparation, that they have to spend time in defending it. I think that's the biggest advantage to having an option in your game plan.
Coach, who I thought really did a nice job of that this year was Kansas. They had those defenses just screwed up. They were doing
yeah.
misdirection assignment football. I mean, it was really tough. And when you add that assignment football into a regular power offense, commentators during the Penn State game was saying how tough your offense was because you could run the ball power, but you could option the ball, and then you could option pass it. And also, obviously, you play action pass just about every major run you had. So, whether it was off tackle, no matter what, you had to play action pass for it. So, when you look at that, is you were actually way ahead of being able to incorporate all those in kind of like a Nebraska team.
Yeah, that was something. Well, you just think of our game with Kansas. I'll bet you at least 3 times on 3rd down and 8 or 9, they ran the option play for 12, 13 yards on us. They'll be a force to. That guy did a great job. He brought that program a long way. Yeah, because they were competitive with everybody.
Well, you're right, Coach. With everybody, it has some major wins besides WVU. But when I think of it, you can go ahead and you can turn your fortune around. If Kansas can turn their fortune around in 2 years, then it's got to leave the Mountaineers hope that Neil Brown can do it. But that's going to lead me into this now, okay? Because my whole contention was, listen, okay, if we're going to do this and we're going to figure out this transfer portal and we're going to figure out this NIL, for me, until the rules change, they're permanently together. NIL, transfer portal. My whole thing is, how do you win at the transfer portal? You can't just win in the field with X's and O's, okay? You got to win in the transfer portal as well. How would you, Don Nehlen, Hall of Fame coach, now approach that?
Well, Dale, I'm probably not the right guy to ask because I don't know enough about it. The biggest thing is you better be able, when you recruit a kid out of the transfer portal, you better get the right kind of guy. In other words, if you're gonna recruit a kid out of the transfer portal, you better know if he's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're going to bother to bring in a defensive tackle or a quarterback or a running back or a defensive back, you better bring one in that's really going to help you. You don't need some guy that comes in and is going to be a maybe.
Mm-hmm.
You better have to find a way to put people on your staff that are in charge of evaluating transfer guys. Soon as a kid enters the portal, you better have people finding ways to evaluate that kid to see if you're interested in him. Just because he enters the portal, I wouldn't be jumping on him. I would evaluate him before I jumped on him. Because a lot of guys that enter the portal because they're not good enough at the place they are. They're not getting, misery loves company. And a lot of kids,
true.
Sure, a lot of kids that transfer because they're not good enough at the place they are. And you don't need to recruit some kid that's a cancer, because if he's unhappy at the place that he's leaving, he comes to your place and things don't work out, then he becomes the cancer that you brought in.
Right. And what does a cancer do, Coach, to a locker room? I want to hear it from the Hall of Fame. What does it do?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what he does. He screws you up big time. And because anytime you have a very unhappy kid, he's going to try to find a lot of guys to bring with him. He's going to say, man, these coaches aren't worth a crap. I ought to be doing this, and they're screwing me, and they're screwing you. And Dale, I had a rule on my coaching staff, and that I thought was really a good rule. I told them, I said, hey, when practice is over, because when we practiced on Tuesday and Wednesday, we got after our kids pretty good. We had inside run and we'd have goal line and we hit and it was a tough day. And and I always told our kids, I said, hey, football's a game, and if you're not having fun, I want to know about it. But on Tuesday and Wednesday, they didn't have a lot of fun. They came in and they were bruised up. And I told our coaches, I said, hey, when practice is over, I don't want any of you guys in this coach's locker room. I want you in that player's locker room, and I want you to go see your players and mingle around with them. Put your arm around them and let them know you love them. Because I don't ever want a kid leaving my locker room unhappy. If a kid had a bad practice, you let them know, hey, Johnny, things weren't great today, but you'll be super tomorrow. Don't let a kid leave your locker room unhappy. Make sure that he leaves with a good attitude. If he had a bad practice, you put your arm around him and tell him, don't worry about it, you're going to be good tomorrow. And I also told my coaches, hey, build up the other coach. If you're an offensive line coach, go over and talk to that defensive tackle and say, hey, Johnny, we got after you pretty good today, didn't we? But you got a great coach. He'll have you going really great tomorrow. Use your noggin. Build up other coaches. Build up each other. And that's the way I operated with my coaches. Because if you have happy kids, then the head coach can motivate them. If those kids are unhappy, the head coach can't motivate them. So that was a rule I had with my staff, and I had that all the time I coached, and it worked in most occasions.
And you taught me the game as a coach too. Remember, I was your graduate assistant for numerous years, and that is the way. I am a testament saying yes. That is the way you coach, because I remember Mike Jacobs coming to me and saying, you had a lousy day, Wolf. You're going to be better tomorrow. And I remember Bill Kurlavich coming to me and saying, yeah, we got after you, but Jake's going to get you straight. I mean, I'm telling you, flat, verbatim. I can remember exactly those specific examples. And so that's a testament of, yes, you are right. And it did work, because there are very few cancers in the locker room during my times there with you.
Yeah. Well, Dale, a head coach, I couldn't coach all 100 kids. So I coached my coaches. I always felt, the head coach I was in charge of motivating our football team, but in order to motivate them, I left my coaches coach. I didn't try to coach the guards and centers. I didn't try to coach the tackles. I didn't try to coach the secondary. I couldn't be all those places at one time. So I left my coaches coach. But I told my coaches, I said, hey, gang, when I blow that whistle, I expect your asses to get these kids here right now. And I said, but if they're unhappy, then whatever I say is going to go out in one ear and out the other. But if they're happy guys, then I'm going to be able to handle them. And here's how we're going to keep them happy. And that's how I coached my coaches. And it's I never stopped motivating. When I'd come out my office and Dale Wolfley went down the hallway or Darryl Talley went down the hallway, I stopped and grabbed him by the arm. And I'd say, hey, man, you need a little work in the weight room, or you're, boy, or I'd tap him on the butt, or I'd smack him in the belly, or do something stupid, something crazy. But I never stopped motivating, because I thought that was my job.
Yeah.
And because there's no way a head coach can coach that whole football team. And the head coaches that try to do that, then their staff starts to become this guy, he's trying to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And
They want to do their job.
yeah, exactly. So anyhow, that's just, again, I'm old school. That was my philosophy. And Dale, I was very fortunate to work for Coach Schembeckler
Yeah.
because he was like that. He gave all of us a job to do, and he expected us to do it. He never ever bothered me when I coached. He said, "Hey, these are your guys. You coach them." He never came in a meeting of mine. He he never bothered me on the field. He never bothered the line coach. He never bothered any of us. But he expected us to do our job. And then when we looked at film, then he knew if we were doing our job or not.
Right.
Just like when we looked at film at West Virginia at night, all those guys knew that I knew they were doing their job. Or I'd say, "Hey, Dave, what the hell's this?"
I remember a couple of those things in the meeting room. We're going to cut this here, Coach, but I want to keep bringing you back on and talk to you about some specific stuff. I think we're missing this in football. And my whole mission is I don't want to just bring back old school. I want to bring back what's important about old school, about what's good in football, and mesh it with all the good stuff that is now. And I really would love to see more and more coaches get involved in talking like this. I want you to tell the story, if you can remember. Used to see when Jeff Hostetler, your son-in-law, he was already your son-in-law married to Vicky, your daughter, and you said that the two teams, the New York Giants would line up, and the Super Bowl New York Giants would line up here, and they'd be in their suits, and then the other NFL team, whatever it might be, will be lined up here. You can't tell the difference. Do you remember that story?
Yeah. When I talked, I'd say, "Hey, the Super Bowl team can walk in here with just their shorts on. They parade in front of all of you. And then the team that finished last could walk across this stage, and you could never tell the difference between the two teams. But one expected to win, and the other team hoped that they could win."
Yes.
And the big difference is how you think, how you believe. That's the difference in the great team and the very average team, is how you believe and how you prepare. That's the whole key. Teams that really believe, and you believe you can win when you prepare properly. And I remember telling a lot of teams that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Coach, I want to thank you so much for this time. Again, I'm going to bring it back if you don't mind. We'll keep doing this. We got a couple other projects that we're going to be doing. A big old blown out documentary going on here, and so I'm just excited. I know you're going to be traveling here in a few months as well with Jan, and be safe and sound. Have a lot of fun, but you got a lot of work to do when you come back. So be ready. Get that computer skills going again, and remember how they work. All right, Coach?
You need to give me a lesson on the computer still.
Coach, I love you, man. The Wolfleys love you. My mom, Hoopy, she loves you. Your players love you. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, happy birthday to you, your 87th birthday. Happy New Year to you and Jan and your family. God bless you, Coach. I love you.
Thanks, Dale. I love you too, brother. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.